I still remember the first time I told them my dream. I was barely 20, fresh out of university, eyes sparkling with ideas, heart pounding with excitement. I want to start my own company, I said, trying to sound confident. The room went silent, not the kind of quiet that comes from awe or pride, but the kind that makes your chest tighten and your stomach sink. My father didn't even glance up from the newspaper he was reading. My mother froze mid-step, her hand hovering over the tray she was carrying. Then she let out a sigh so heavy it felt like it landed in my chest. A startup? She asked, her voice almost trembling with disbelief. With what money, with what experience? I tried to explain, to tell them I had a plan, that I had already done my research, that I had a vision. But every word was met with a shake of the head, a dismissive shrug, or a scoff that stung worse than any insult could. My father finally looked at me, his eyes sharp, judgmental. This is not America. People like us don't gamble on dreams, get a job. From that day forward, my startup wasn't called a business. It wasn't an ambition. It wasn't a chance. It was called a waste, and they didn't stop there. Every late night spent coding, every rejection email from investors, every time I survived on instant noodles just to pay the bills, it all came with a side of their voices in my head. When will you grow up? How long will you embarrass us? 8 years is too long to fail. Family gatherings became unbearable. Relatives whispered behind their hands, assuming I couldn't hear them. Friends congratulated themselves on their real jobs, while I sat quietly, pretending I didn't care, and every time I walked past my parents, I felt their disappointment weighing on me like a tangible thing, pressing me down into a corner of inadequacy I couldn't escape. Yet I didn't argue, I didn't storm out. I just stayed quiet, biting back tears, swallowing my hurt, and nurturing the small, flickering fire inside me. Because I had learned early on that sometimes, the only way to survive being doubted by those who are supposed to love you most is to win in silence, to let your dreams grow quietly while their skepticism grows louder. And so I started alone, with nothing but determination and a heart full of hope, ready to turn their laughter into my motivation. 8 years, 8 long, lonely years, that's how long I stayed invisible in my own home, the silent dreamer everyone thought would fail. My parents never asked how the startup was going. They didn't care about the blood, sweat, and sleepless nights I poured into it. To them, success only meant a regular salary, a stable job, and someone else's company logo on my resume. My mother's disappointment was subtle but constant. At family dinners, my siblings were served first. At gatherings, my achievements were never mentioned. My father introduced me as still figuring things out, as if I were trapped in some permanent adolescence. Every word, every glance, every dismissive remark chipped away at my confidence, but instead of breaking me, it forced me to build myself quietly, brick by brick. There were nights when I cried in the darkness, clutching my laptop like it was the only thing that believed in me. Emails from investors that ended in polite rejections were nightmares I had to face alone. Friends drifted away, some silently judging my stubbornness, others too busy building their own lives to notice my struggle. I felt isolated, misunderstood, and betrayed by the very people who were supposed to nurture my dreams, and yet something inside me refused to die. Every setback became fuel, every scoff from my parents a challenge. I started learning to win in silence, to cherish the small victories that no one applauded. When an investor finally said yes, I didn't celebrate. When a product update worked flawlessly, I didn't brag. When a client renewed their contract unexpectedly, I smiled quietly to myself in my small, lonely apartment. Years passed, my startup, once considered a waste, slowly began to take shape. What began as a tiny idea with no backing turned into something tangible. Profit came in, recognition began. The software that once existed only in my head started to change lives, one client at a time. I saw the proof that I was capable, that I had built something from nothing. By the 8th year, I had grown in ways they could never understand. My parents still couldn't see the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the moments when I almost gave up but didn't. They didn't know the lengths I went to make my vision real. They only knew the child they had called a failure for 8 years, and that child had quietly become unstoppable. I learned a harsh truth. When people doubt you for years, their disbelief can either crush you, or it can ignite a fire so strong that nothing can put it out. I chose to let it burn. It happened on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning. My inbox pinged, and there it was, a subject line that made my heart skip a beat. Congratulations, you have been selected as the winner of the National Innovation Award. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. My fingers hovered over the mouse, then trembled as I opened the email. Every detail was there: the date, the venue, the names of industry leaders who would attend. I couldn't breathe at first. Then I laughed, a shaky, incredulous laugh, and finally, tears blurred my vision. I had done it. After 8 years of being dismissed, mocked, and told my dreams were a waste, I had done it. When I told my parents, their reactions were predictable. My father raised an eyebrow. For what? He asked, as if innovation were some trivial hobby. My mother, busy in the kitchen, barely looked up. "Don't forget the grocery list," she said. "Dinner is at 7. They had no idea. They couldn't imagine that the company they had ridiculed, the waste they had doubted, was now recognized on a national level. They didn't know my company's name would be printed on banners. They didn't know my face would be listed on programs. They didn't know that, unknowingly, my mother was catering part of the event itself. The day of the ceremony arrived. I dressed carefully, wearing the suit I had bought for an interview years ago. A suit that had felt like a symbol of hope then and now felt like armor. Walking into the hall, I saw the media, the cameras, the government officials, and the crowd that had come to witness innovation, not knowing who I was. I took a deep breath and reminded myself of every night I had stayed awake, every rejection, every tear, every moment my parents' voices had told me I would fail. Every doubt had led me here. Every discouragement had fueled me. And then it happened. The host approached the podium, and I could feel the world holding its breath. The spotlight hit, the room quieted, and the host's voice rang out. "And the winner of this year's National Innovation Award is..." My heart thudded so loudly I thought it might be heard in the back row. And then I heard it. My company's name echoing through the hall, louder than any insult, louder than every "you'll never succeed" they had ever said. I stood. I walked toward the stage, my chest swelling with something I hadn't felt in years: validation. Not from them, but from the world, and somewhere in the crowd across the hall, I caught a glimpse of my mother. She froze, and in that moment, I knew everything was about to change. The hall was filled with anticipation. Cameras flashed, officials murmured, and I felt my heartbeat thundering like a drum in my chest. Every step I took toward the stage was a reminder of the years I had spent fighting for this moment in silence, building something they had called a waste. And then, as the host's voice rang out, announcing my company's name as the winner, time seemed to slow. I looked out into the crowd, and my eyes fell on her, my mother. She was standing by the catering table, tray in hand, frozen mid-motion. Plates teetered precariously, utensils clattering against the edges. Her lips parted slightly, and her eyes widened, reflecting a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something I hadn't expected: pride. But it was too much for her to process in an instant. The tray slipped from her hands, crashing to the floor. Plates shattered, food scattered across the polished tiles, but nobody noticed. Every eye was on me, on the child they had called a failure for 8 long years, now standing in the spotlight of recognition and achievement. I walked onto the stage, each step deliberate, each heartbeat echoing the silent victories of the past 8 years. I accepted the award, the weight of it more than just metal and marble. It was the weight of proof, the weight of perseverance, the weight of a dream realized despite endless doubt. As the applause thundered around me, I glanced back at my mother. Tears streamed down her cheeks now. She tried to speak, but no words came out. My father's jaw was tight. He avoided my gaze, but his eyes betrayed a glimmer of realization. The child they had doubted, the startup they had labeled a waste, had conquered the world without their permission, without their support. Later that evening, at home, the shattered tray still lay on the kitchen floor. My parents sat silently, too stunned to form sentences. My father's voice was barely a whisper when he finally spoke. "We didn't know." I smiled gently, a quiet warmth in my chest that was far stronger than anger or resentment. "I know," I said, and in that simple acknowledgment, all the years of struggle, all the sleepless nights, all the moments I felt invisible, they culminated into a triumph that words could hardly capture. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't loud or cruel. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and unstoppable. Sometimes it's living a life so full and so successful that their disbelief and doubt crumble around them, leaving only silence and awe. I had waited 8 years, and now the silence spoke louder than any words ever could.